Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. With Republicans now in control of the House and the Senate up in Congress, Americans and Texans are curious as to whether or not they'll balance the budget and change the way things have been done inside the nation's capital. Congressman Lamar Smith is chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, past chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and is hot on the trail of EPA oversight, as well as providing us the latest update in the congressional budget passed last week. Are things changing in Washington, D.C., and can transparency be a reality under a Republican Congress? We're pleased to be able to visit today with Congressman Lamar Smith from the 21st Congressional District in San Antonio. Congressman Lamar Smith, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
You have been with us before. You were on an Easter recess, and we're going to be respectful of your time. There are so many things we could talk about right now, Congressman. The Hillary emails, Bo Bergdahl's been convicted as a traitor, your House budget. I want to just get into a couple of things. First of all, you are chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. You're former chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, but I know we've run some stories and appreciate your work. You have been after the EPA, impacting a lot of folks, a lot of farmers and ranchers here in Texas, and there's some transparency issues. The administration that claimed to be the most transparent or want to be in history. Tell us what you're doing as chairman of Science, Space, and Technology.
Okay, lots to be told there, and thanks for your interest. The EPA, it's hard to find out or figure out which of this administration's agencies is most out of control, but certainly the EPA would be one of my nominees for most out of control.
Okay.
And I say that because they are being the opposite of transparent. We asked the EPA, and we asked the President's Science Advisor, and said, we'd like to see the underlying data that you're using to justify all these what we would consider unnecessary and burdensome regulations. These are regulations that are costing the American people $100 billion. And they said, sure, you ought to see it. It ought to be made public. It ought to be peer reviewed. After all, the taxpayers paid for it. And I said, okay, give me the data. I wrote 6 letters to the EPA. They refused to give us the data. So I issued the first subpoena by a science committee chairman in 21 years. And basically the subpoena just said, show us the data. We have a right to be suspicious if you're not willing to let it be peer reviewed, other scientists see it, and so forth. And they still have not given it to us. They're starting to dribble out information, but it's not any new information. So we're getting the usual stonewall from this administration. The second subpoena that I issued against the EPA last week was a subpoena to try to get some information about the 7,000 text messages that the administrator of the EPA, Gina McCarthy, had sent over a 4-year period of time. She had used her official BlackBerry device, her official iPhone device, and she said that only one of those 7,000 text messages related to her official position, yet she was using official devices. Either she wasn't doing her job, or we're not getting all the truth here. And so my subpoena last week was to get the information to try to find out if any of those text messages went to officials, and if so, what did they say that might have some impact on these regulations that we're seeing. And they're supposed to be official, they're supposed to be public under the Freedom of Information Act. So the EPA is not cooperating on any level. They're taking stands that are quite frankly incredible and inconceivable and duplicitous, and so we're going to stay after the EPA. I introduced a bill that now has passed the House floor that said to the EPA, basically, no regulation can take effect unless the underlying data has been made public and the American people can see it. We're going to be able to get through the House as we have, but whether we get it through the Senate is another question. It's going to take some Democratic votes to make this administration transparent. We don't know if they're there, but clearly we have to continue to try to hold the EPA accountable, and not only hold the EPA accountable, but hold the administration accountable at all levels.
Well, let me ask you about that, or try and drill down a little bit further. As chairman of this Science, Space, and Technology Committee, you have oversight of NASA, EPA, the FAA, a number of critical agencies, and you Republicans have now the majority said you're going to change things. You have oversight responsibility of EPA. Do Americans and does Congress, you as chairman, feel like you've still got that EPA oversight ability?
We have that oversight, and in fact, we're going to be having more oversight hearings of the EPA. We need to engage the American people, just as you and I are doing right here, because if the American people find out how this administration is operating, what they're trying to hide, what they're trying to keep secret, what they won't reveal to the American people themselves, then that kind of popular demand will, I think, get good results from this administration. They're a political operation. They'll respond to the American people. So part of this is an educational process. Part of this is just letting the American people know what the administration is doing or not doing, and that's what these oversight hearings are about, and that's what your good media coverage is about as well.
Let's move, if I can, Congressman, to some of the more recent activities. You all last week addressed and dealt with the fiscal year 2016 budget. Republicans are now in control of the House and the Senate up there. I know you were intimately involved and have been in the Balanced Budget Act's efforts before. Tell us what you can about the House budget and what are some of the details that would show you all really are changing things up there.
Jim, we voted on 6 budgets this last week, everything from the administration's budget to the Democrats' budget to the Black Caucus budget to the Republican Study Committee budget to the Republican Party or leadership budget. I voted on 2 budgets. They were the only 2 budgets that actually got to a balanced budget, one in 7 years, one in 10 years. And by the way, I always co-sponsor these balanced budget amendments to the Constitution. We have to get our economic house in order.
Okay.
Some years ago, I was actually a member of the Budget Committee, and that was actually the last time, it was in the 1990s, that was the last time we had a balanced budget in America. And somehow we ought to have one more often than every generation. The difference between the administration's budget, the Democrats' budget, and the Republican budget is just incredible. There's very little in the way of similarities. The Democrats' budget increased taxes by $2 trillion. $2 trillion over the next 10 years and never got to a balanced budget. The Republican budgets never increased taxes and got to a balanced budget, as I say, one in 7 years, one in 10 years. So there's a diametrical difference here between the 2 parties, and that's there for the American people to see. What are the priorities? I happen to think that adding to our deficit and debt every single year is a drag on the economy. That's why we have economic growth dragging along the bottom. That's why family incomes have been stagnant for the last 6 years. We have to get that chain off of our ankles, which is the deficit and the debt, if we're going to release the economic energy that we have in this country. So I favor getting to a balanced budget, and it's unfortunate that the President and the Democrats want to go another direction, but they're paying a price. We're still haven't recovered from being in a recession. As I said, family incomes are still flat, and if we're going to correct all that, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, but more than anything else, we cannot keep adding to the debt. And as you know, the debt is the cumulative deficits over the years. This year our deficit is close to $500 billion. You just can't keep going like that. We don't ask any family to do anything other than balance their budget year after year. If a typical family overspent and spent beyond their means year after year after year, they wouldn't survive, they'd be in bankruptcy. And the country needs to live the same way as the American families do.
Well, let's drill down maybe a little bit further, because I know Obamacare is something that people are paying their taxes now, potentially paying a fine. How about addressing Obamacare in this budget? Talk about what may or may not have been done there.
On the Republican budgets, we repealed Obamacare once again, and remember that Obamacare is now more unpopular than it is popular. More people don't like it than like it, and that's just going to get worse, in my opinion. I think the premiums are projected to go up 8% next year and 8% the following year. The deductibles are higher every year. People are paying for procedures that they'll never use. So you have more and more people unhappy with Obamacare, and that's why the Republicans are going to continue to try to repeal it. Now, we're not going to be able to do it. We're not going to be able to get the votes in the Senate to repeal. The President would obviously veto his number one program. But we're waiting for the Supreme Court decision in June. It's still a possibility that they might find with the various states, 30 some odd in number, who have filed a case against Obamacare. And that could go either way. If Obamacare is in effect pulled apart, then we will have an immediate plan to replace Obamacare so the people who have enrolled will not lose their health insurance. But on the whole, if nothing else, we certainly should eliminate the mandate in Obamacare. So if people want to stay in it, fine, but don't force people to stay in it if they have other means of getting health care insurance.
One final question, Mr. Chairman. You represent Congressional District 21, San Antonio. It goes down through the Hill Country, and you have in the past called, I want to divert a little bit to border security, you've called the President's executive order executive amnesty. I know it's not necessarily anything that can get past the President's desk as well, but give us a little bit and talk of an update, if you would, on border security.
Jim, if there's a number one issue in my district beyond the incompetence of the administration, and my district goes all the way from Austin to San Antonio, as you mentioned, if there's the number one issue, it's probably border security. We feel it more in Texas, across the state, and I'm beginning to start thinking that every state's on the border because everybody cares about it nowadays. I started the Border Security Caucus in Congress. We have over 70 members now, and what we say is secure the border first before we do anything else, and that's what we have to do. We cannot trust the president to enforce immigration laws, and that's probably why you're not going to see many more laws passed in this Congress. The president has actually done his best to undermine laws, ignore laws, make up new laws through his executive orders and the executive amnesty that you mentioned. So we're probably not going to get much done with immigration just because we don't trust the president to enforce immigration laws.
Well, speaking of getting things done, we're going to leave it there and let you get on the road. Congressman Lamar Smith from Congressional District 21, Chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. We appreciate you coming by, Congressman.
Thank you, Jim.
Folks, be sure and join us for future editions of Texas Insider TV. And remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.